Hey guys, how you doing? So the Genesis Mini just released last week and we've already pretty much gotten inside the system and have a better understanding of how to hack it. And the main players we have to thank are Honeylab, Madmonkey, Dan the Man, Cyanic, Montrayjak, and KMFDManic. Without going into the specifics, basically once they got into the system they found out that the hardware was very similar to what the NES and SNES Classic have. Once they found that out, it was very easy to get inside it and get Hakchi working for it. And before we continue, I want to clarify some things that I guess have been being spread around. I heard in a couple Discord channels that there's some misinformation about who's responsible for Hakchi and things like that, so let's clarify that real quick. Someone said that the Mod My Classic team was responsible for Hakchi, and that is incorrect. They helped out with producing cores and games and things like that for Hakchi, but they weren't directly responsible for creating the system. That was Madmonkey. Madmonkey created the very first Hakchi, and then Cluster came and created Hakchi 2, which looks similar to the current version of Hakchi that we use today. Hakchi CE, which is the newest version, was forked from that Hakchi 2 that Cluster made a long time ago. The team behind the current Hakchi is Team Shinkansen, and that is Dan the Man, Princess Daffy, Skogaby, and Madmonkey. So Mod My Classic and Team Shinkansen are two completely different teams. Also remember, anything I show you in this video is not complete. It is very, very early stage in its development right now. It is nowhere safe yet to distribute to the public. Don't try anything with your system until you hear from the devs themselves that it's safe to do so. They have to create some kind of fail-safe before they actually release this because we don't want people breaking their systems. And they will make it known when they have something available to the public. So I have a couple really cool things to show you guys. First one is the ability to turn your SNES Classic into a Sega Genesis Mini. It's basically the same method that we use now for multi-booting, like turning your SNES Classic into an NES Classic or the Famicom Mini. And I have a very special version of Hakchi that Madmonkey personally gave me that will allow me to do this. So don't do this with your current version of Hakchi, it's not going to work. Here is my SNES Classic. This is stock right now. Nothing custom has been flashed to this. It's as if I just bought it from the store. And I have my two cables coming out from the back. We have the HDMI cable going to my capture software, and the cable that came with this system is plugged into my PC. So I'm going to flash this custom kernel to my system real quick. Do we want to flash it? Yes. So now we're going to enter FEL mode on the SNES Classic, which you have to do when you flash it normally. So holding reset, hitting power. Hopefully the screen changes on us real quick. Okay, waiting for the device. Releasing reset. Now we're going to wait for the kernel to be flashed to the system. And there we go, done. We can upload games to our SNES Classic now. I'm going to click OK. Now, just like when we are dual booting or multi-booting, I just have to add the HSQS file to Hakchi. And I'm going to sync this file to my SNES Classic. It's a pretty big size file. It's 108 megabytes, so it's going to take up a lot of space. Here's our SNES Classic booted up, and we have the one file that we added, the Sega file. And you can see here, using the controller for the SNES Classic, and we can move through the menu just so you can see that I am using this controller with the actual SNES Classic. So we're going to go down, we're going to hit A on the Sega file. My capture software is probably going to cut out because when the firmware flashes it cuts out the signal, but here we go, Hakchi. So we're still on the SNES Classic. It's flashing right now. Wait a minute. There it is. So same controller. Now we're moving through the games of the Sega Genesis UI. Now none of this is perfect. It's still incredibly early in development. You can still do the save states, you can sort, you still have the bookshelf mode, and I'm sure with a new Hakchi update that will be available to everybody as long as you can find that Sega file, which no one will be able to distribute because it's going to be under copyright. But it shouldn't be any harder than finding the NES or SNES Classic HSQS file anyway. So how the controller is set up, you have movement with the D-pad. You have A, B, and C buttons. Start will pause and unpause your game. And normally on the Sega Genesis Mini, if you hold down the start button, it'll bring up the menu where you can save your state or anything like that. That's not working right now. Madmonkey is still working on the complete controller configuration, so it works perfectly. But all the buttons do work just fine. And the select button works as the mode button on the Retrobit style controllers, where if you hit select, it brings up the menu automatically. You don't have to hold down the start button for the 5 seconds. So since we can't do the hold start method to get to the menu, you can hit the select button and it opens it up right away. And something cool I always thought that you were able to do with dual boot before is if you go to tools, switch running firmware, to switch back, you can just select your firmware right here. So default firmware and this will take us back to our SNES Classic. And if we want to go back to the Sega, we just click on that and then hit OK. So let's move on to what we can actually do with the Sega Genesis Mini itself. This required a whole bunch of help from Madmonkey. He actually walked me through step by step how to get this to work. Well, we have Retroarch running on the Sega Genesis Mini through Hakchi. And we have to go old school with the version of Hakchi we're using now. It's Hakchi GUI, one of the very first versions of Hakchi that Madmonkey made. We're talking this version of Hakchi. Now, I'm not going to go through all the steps as to how I did all this because it's a lot, and by the time this is ready for public release, you're not going to have to do any of that. It's going to be much more simplified. I mentioned earlier when we were flashing the custom firmware with the SNES Classic, you have to enter FEL mode by holding reset and pushing power. Well, you kind of do the same thing with the Genesis Mini, except the timing is crazy. It's really trial and error right now, and it took me a lot of times to get it right to enter FEL mode. But we're still working on it. There's a lot of testing going on right now. Eventually, we'll get it right away. I do have a method I think that is working for me 100%, but it's not very practical. I'm going to attach the same cord I used to attach my SNES Classic to my PC, plug that into the Sega Genesis Mini. So usually when you enter FEL mode on the SNES Classic, you hear like a chime coming from Windows saying that your system is plugged in, and then it registers as like an NES or SNES Classic or something like that. I'm going to attempt to go into FEL mode with the Genesis, and like I said, we don't have the timing down yet, right? So I'm going to hold down the reset button, power on. I'm going to wait until I hear that chime. Okay, I just let go of resets. And sometimes you'll hear another chime saying it disconnected. I didn't hear that chime. I'm going to check the device manager real quick to see if it's connected. If you can see down here at the bottom, it is showing that there is a Nintendo Classic hooked up. That is actually my Sega Genesis Mini. But all I have to do is hit memboot, and this is going to upload some files to the Genesis Mini, just temporary files, to get this to work. So let's hit memboot. It's working first try. Oh my gosh, that's never happened before. uboot.bin. Everything says okay. Let's see if there's anything on the system itself. We got something. There we go. The Hakchi logo is on the Genesis Mini. And we're not done yet. We still have to do one more thing. We have to boot into Retroarch because right now all we're looking at is a Hakchi logo. I'm going to do that by telnetting into the system with PuTTY. I'm going to make sure telnet is selected. I'm going to put in the IP address. Now when I hit open, there's the Madmonkey login. Type in root for the password. Now here I'm going to type boot, and that's going to load up Retroarch on the Genesis Mini. There's the code. Let's take a look here. Actually, look, there it is. Retroarch running on the Sega Genesis Mini. Now here's the thing. The Genesis controller that came with the system will not work on this menu. We don't have the config file for the controller yet, so it doesn't work. So if I put in the Genesis controller and move around, nothing happens. But if I hook up another USB controller to it, like a PlayStation Classic controller, like that, and now we can navigate through the menus. And this is fully functional too. I added one game to it. Let me see if I remember where I put that game. Start directory. I think it was VAR Games. There's Art of Fighting. So this runs on the Genesis Plus GX core, a Sega game on the Sega Mini with a PlayStation Classic controller. And it all works fine. So we haven't gotten to this stage yet where we can add games directly to the Sega UI, but we do have this. We have Retroarch running perfectly on the system, so we're getting there. And if we hit start and select on the controller to go back to our Retroarch menu, and when we quit out of Retroarch, we should be taken back to the Sega Genesis Mini menu. Might take a minute. There it is. And that's where we're at with the Genesis Mini hacking scene right now. You can run the Sega Genesis UI on your NES or SNES Classic, and we have Retroarch running on the Sega Genesis Mini. And Madmonkey has been incredible with this whole thing. He sat with me and did it step by step so that I can show you guys all this cool stuff that's been happening. But again, a huge thank you to everybody involved. Madmonkey, Dan the Man, Honeylab, Cyanic, KMFDManic, Montrayjak. And what's got me most excited is that Hakchi is already an incredible program for the SNES Classic, and it looks like that's what we'll be able to use going forward, modding the Sega Genesis Mini. I know it's going to be hard to be patient and wait for something, but trust me, that is the safest way to go. Once again, don't listen to anybody saying that they have something ready unless it's coming from a developer directly. Make sure you keep coming back. I'm going to cover more on the Sega Genesis hacking scene as more develops. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. This is the part of the video where I thank those users who support the channel through Patreon. Eric Cologne, Mike Muniz, Sam Torres, William Wend, Yaroslav Oruzov.